Burning Man has this ability to have this kind of outsized position in people's imagination where they think they understand what's so lame about it without ever having been. And I'm here to tell you what's so lame about it is way more lame than you could imagine. But what's cool about it is something that you also probably couldn't imagine. I went in '96 for the first time, and it was fucking scary, and it was dangerous, and it was out of control. People died. Buildings were set on fire. There was a drive-by shooting range. It was what people think of when they say Burning Man used to be cool, and it was fucking terrifying. And these days, it's become this, I guess, much more sanitized version of what it is, but it still has this ability, I think, to like blow my mind on these levels that are, they're so specific. I remember one night we were walking in the way, way, way out in the middle of the desert, and we saw like a single blue light, and we had nothing else to do, so we just followed the blue light. We walked for an hour towards this blue light, and it was way out. There was no party happening anywhere. There was like an 80-year-old man who had set up a tiny marionette stage, and he was doing a marionette performance for absolutely fucking nobody. He did it for me. Like, it was just for whoever happened to stumble by. Those are the kind of moments in my life that I go like, there is wonder in randomness, and there's joy here.
We got a question that I think nicely segues into what I want to talk about next. Have you ever done stand-up in American Sign Language? What is the difference between hearing and non-hearing audiences? This is both your parents are deaf, and would you call yourself coda, child of?
I am a coda.
Yeah.
I would say, I've never done an all-deaf audience before. I would say that the difference between a deaf audience member and a hearing audience member, I don't know, the laughs sometimes come like 10 seconds later, but I would say I've never had a bad show with deaf audience members in it. There's something, like when there is an interpreter and there's a presence of deaf audience members, there's something to me that's so comforting and so familiar and so feels like home that it always makes the show electric. I think we can feel in the audience right now the absolute visceral electricity that's happening. But I can tell you my mascot story if we're talking about deafness now.
You want to do it?
Do you guys want to hear the mascot story? That's the kind of energy I've been looking for. I was working as a mascot. I was working as a waiter in a cocktail bar. I was working as a mascot. I was dressed in a bear costume on Telegraph Avenue in Bear Basics. It was a store called Bear Basics that sold UC Berkeley gear. And I had gotten my start in show business. And I was making $4.25 an hour, and I would go there straight from a rave, so I wouldn't have slept all night. I'd buy a rave breakfast, which was 22 ounces of Mountain Dew and a pack of Newports, and I would pass out flyers on Telegraph Avenue, and then every once in a while I'd take a smoke break. I'd grab the bear head, paper mache bear head off of my head, put it sort of akimbo on top of my head, and like take a smoke break, and then a little kid would walk by invariably and go like, "Why, mommy, why is the bear smoking?" And I'd be like, "I'm Smokey the Bear, kid, now fuck off," or whatever. My mom at that time said, "Would you like to come to the Deaf Can program?" My mother was the head of a deaf education department at Laney College, a community college in Oakland, where she had put herself through night school. We were raised on SSI, and we were a very poor family, and my mom took whatever money she could and put it towards her education. She got an associate's degree, then a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree, all at night, and left us latchkey to wait for her. We were proud to do it. I went to every one of those graduations, and she finally got a job heading up this department, the Deaf Can program. She said, "They're hiring interpreters at the Deaf Can program." I said, "I want nothing to do with that. I don't have any desire to cross-contaminate the trauma of my childhood with my employment," because the codas will know. If you are a coda, it is mandatory that your childhood will be one part childhood and like one part non-consensual sign language interpretation internship program. Like, I interpreted for everything for my mother, like all of her doctor's appointments, all of everything. And I can't tell you how many times I showed up at a doctor's appointment and they just hadn't bothered to get anybody. And it was like, if I wasn't here, my mom wouldn't be able to get treated. And so that was my childhood. And then eventually when I started getting into trouble, the meetings became about me. And so now I was the interpreter at a meeting about which I was the subject. And then you have to start doing like a real dance, like, because when you do that kind of interpreting, you can't give over like a full bullshit. You can't be like, we think he's great. We of the Oakland Police Department called this meeting to inform you you've got one heck of a son. Because then my mom will be like, okay, this smells shitty. Like, I know this isn't true. But you also can't give the full picture of how bad you are. So you have to go like, well, we think he shows promise. He's got some problems, sure. But we do think someday he'll write a book and be a 92Y. You know, that kind of energy. So I didn't want to be an interpreter. And then she said they're paying $13.25 an hour. I was like, I'm very interested in being an interpreter. So she brought me to her work, and I had a job interview with my boss, Catherine, who was a blind and deaf woman who interviewed me through tactile sign by putting her hands on top of my hands and assessing where I was at, assessing by feel how crisp my signing was. And the fact that I was sitting in an office being interviewed by the head of the interpreting program at the DEFCAN department by a deaf-blind woman is a tale of emancipation and grabbing freedom where nobody was offering it, that starts in the 1700s in France, where a French priest walked by two deaf sisters and saw what they were doing and thought, I think that's a language, and said to them, please teach me. And they taught him, and he taught them French. And he started the first school for the deaf in France, and the deaf community in France came together to create the first recognized sign system, French Sign Language. Literally at that time, they would do these traveling road shows where the students who had learned French would be assembled on a stage, and a French educator would ask the audience, ask them a question, and they would ask some question in French, like some sort of, French ask question, like what degree of suffering can be borne by man, or how many cremes is too many cremes for a right brie, and then the educator would sign that question that was in French Sign Language to the assembled deaf students, and they would go up to a chalkboard, write on the chalkboard the answer in perfect French, 3 crèmes, or whatever the answer was. And people lost their fucking minds. They'd go, this is amazing. It was like real-time miracle shit. And that allowed that school for the deaf to start to spread its message, which got to America. And Thomas Gallaudet, this hearing guy in America, came to France, and he got to that school, and he went up to a man named Laurent Clerc, who is, there's no other way to say it, a genius, and he said, come back with me to America, and let's start a similar school system there. They came back, they sailed from France to America, and by the time they landed, Gallaudet could sign, and Clerc knew English. Like I said, he was a genius. And they started American Sign Language, and started the schools for the deaf in America. That American Sign Language traveled across from France to America, across the country, to the Bay Area, to my mother when she was 13 to go to the California School for the Deaf to finally get her native language, to me, to Catherine, the woman that was interviewing me. It was a miracle in real time that flowed through my fingers and flowed through hers, and that is where I started my journey in sign language interpreting.
I mean, that chapter in the book is